Hello everyone, this is Sonia Byers, CEO of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Here we uncover how the intersection of identities produces different experiences for different people. While some identities may be more privileged due to their class, race, gender or faith, others may experience inordinate discrimination. Join us as we hear from the Women in Transport and take an inspiring and analytical lens through which we will understand how power and privilege interface and cross over.
Welcome everybody to our second podcast, Women in Transport. This time around, we are focusing on maternal mental health as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, and we are complementing this podcast with a book club that is later on in May, and then followed by a round table event at the end of May. So lots of stuff for people to look out for. Today's guests, we have lots of interesting people today. I will allow them to introduce themselves and then we'll jump straight into questions.
Thanks, Shireen. Thanks very much for inviting me. And hi, everyone. I'm Jo Field. I'm the President of Women in Transport, and I'm also the Chief Executive of JFG Communications, which is a public affairs consultancy specialising in transport.
Hi, thanks, Shireen. I'm really excited to be here today and joining this panel. Philo Daniel, I am the Global Director for Aviation and Urban Security at Smiths Detection.
Hello, yes, I'm John Manning. I'm the CEO and founder of Ellis Mental Health Support.
Hi, I'm Kalirai. I'm the Sales and Partnerships Director here at National Express, and I'm also the Regional Hub Lead for the West Midlands Hub of Women in Transport.
Hi, happy to join you today. My name is Susan Alake. I'm Head of Governance and Assurance at the Rail Delivery Group.
Amazing, thank you everyone. And I'm Shireen Ali-Khan for Women in Transport, Intersectionality Lead and Specialist Consultant. Okay, so first question, really important question, really lays the foundations. And we hear a lot about mental health, but when we speak about maternal mental health, what does that mean for this group here?
Could I start as the only man? Because I firstly, as well, I don't necessarily feel like, not that I feel like I shouldn't be here, but I want to just highlight that I am not a mother. I don't have, young people around me, but from my perspective, Arthur Ellis, we support about 2,000 families at the minute. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about is from maybe someone else's perspective. So if I do say anything that's kind of not real or not within life experience, and it's a bit more not necessarily academic, but theoretical, then call me out, because I think the listeners would appreciate the practicalities around stuff, which I might not be able to really help with. But for me anyway, maternal mental health is not your own in a way. From what I've seen or what I've understood of it, mental health in particular is very individual. It's how you individually react to certain situations based on how you feel and a variety of things going on in your life. But maternal mental health, you're doing that for two others and another person who hasn't yet got all of those experiences. So for me, maternal mental health is very much about the individual, the parent, but also you have to take into account the young person who, they're also a teacher. So it's kind of, that's what it would be for me. It's kind of a unique thing where you're almost looking after your own mental health, but also teaching the mental health of somebody completely fresh, that's a sponge.
Yeah, John, I think it's interesting because as a child grows up, I think the different helping them going through and your own mental health, I think it varies and how you react and respond to how that child needs you and what their mental state is as well. And I reflect on it, on how I've had to support my own mental health or my daughter's as she's grown up, and it's been slightly different as she's transitioned from being a baby through to adulthood now. So yeah, I think each one, it's an individual, but I think it also changes and you have to adapt yourself as you go through, and no one teaches you how to do that. And I think that's the challenge, and as working mothers, etc. as well.
Just on the back of that, I think no one prepares you. So when you're pregnant and you're going to have your first child, no one prepares you for it, really. You can read as many books as you like, you can talk to as many people as you like, until you're actually in that moment, no one has prepared you for. There's changes to your body, there's changes to how you're feeling, yet you've got a new life that you've got to support, nurture, and bring up to the best of your ability. That plays havoc with your mindset. No one really stops to ask you how you're feeling anymore. It's all about the baby. You know, the midwife comes in. All of that infrastructure is support for the baby, support for how, you know, all of the, you know, constant weight checking, all the rest of it. But no one really slows down and says, well, how are you coping? You know, what's changed in your life and what support do you need? And you've got to navigate that yourself. Even your partner, you know, as men are more involved these days than they were when I first had mine. My eldest is 27, and my youngest is 17, and it kind of, it never stops. It's always on, and you know, no one can relate to how a mom feels. This morning, my youngest, 17-year-old, right? So, school trip, Liverpool. She's got to get to New Street. And it's like, oh, you know, how do I get there? Mom, you're going to take me? I'm like, well, I've got a hard start at 9 o'clock, so I can't get you. And all of that suddenly became my problem. And I've got to navigate all of this. She's quite able and capable. You know, she's got a sister that's going in the same direction. They could have just paired up and gone, but it was my problem. So it's always on, and it varies in degrees and intensity. But, you know, and the best you can get is you just get used to it. You get used to the fact that you're not a priority anymore, and you know, this life that you've given birth to is the priority, and it's dialing it up and down, and you know, and the hope that they can then get to a point in their lives where they can see that and they flip and support you more by doing things for themselves and by checking in with you that you're okay. And that's kind of what the benefit that I'm getting now with older, particularly daughters, I think, is that checking. They check in on me now. So that's kind of hope for you guys that have got younger children. It will happen at some point. It will flip.
Well, 100%. I hope so. Having 3 young children myself, an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So I'm in the thick of it at the moment. I'm in the trenches. But I think for me, maternal mental health is all about remembering you're still a person. Even though you're a mother, you're still a person, you're still an individual, you've still got contributions to make to society, as well as your children and their upbringing. So I think for me, it's remembering you're still a person, because you can get lost in the thick of it, just being a mother and the day-to-day journey, you know, balancing that career and that family life. But remembering you're still a person, and you need to check in on yourself as well as your children checking in on you. But you check in on yourself and stop sometimes and reflect on what's happening in your life, rather than just being on the treadmill, you know, of that motherhood journey. So
yeah, totally agree with that. And just building on both of those points, the always on point and the checking in on yourself, because as people have said, the baby and the small child, they become the top priority. And when you've got a newborn, actually, it's 24/7. They need you 24/7, whether it's feeding, changing, settling, and there is no time to think about yourself. So that point about checking in on yourself is really important. And for me, I think the biggest issue in maternal mental health, particularly for new mothers, it's the confidence thing, because I'm sure, I mean, all new mothers that I've spoken to, something that happened to me as well, your confidence totally dips after becoming a mother, because you're focusing on this other person, because of the massive change that your body has undergone, and the fact in terms of the workplace, if you go on maternity leave, then often you're out of the workplace for a while. So that does actually massively impact on your confidence. So that's a big thing in maternal mental health for me.
Thank you so much. Really great perspectives there. And I love the fact that we've all got different age children. So the journey has similarities, but also some real differences. And certainly as the children get older, there are new phases. And I've said earlier, my little one's going to be 4 in a few weeks' time. And I'm very aware that the journey of motherhood is going to change as the times go by. And I know as soon as my little one was born, I apologized to my mum and I said, I'm really sorry for any aggro that I gave you and I'm still giving you, because just those first early weeks, I was like, geez Louise, like, how do they do this? And I come from a really big family, so having one child who very much keeps me on my toes, and that point around mental health, one of the stats that we kind of dug out when I was researching for this podcast was from the World Health Organization, where they said around 10% of pregnant women and 30% of women who've just given birth experience a mental disorder, and primarily that's around depression. And some of that we can say, you know, the confidence that comes through it, and one of the things that I keep speaking about is a trauma-informed approach, and it might be, you know, some mothers might reflect on this and some might not, but you know, creating a human being, the resources that, you know, the biological and mental resources that are required in that, it is a form of trauma. And people speak about this fourth trimester, and it's only when you're in it you realize what's happened to you and you think, oh God, like, how do I cope from one day to the next? But somehow we do. But when you look back, that genuinely is a form of trauma, and it takes years for your mental health and your body to get back into any sort of shape, or, you know, whichever word you want to use. I know I'm certainly a different shape than I was before, but actually having that and being able to still be a person, I think it's a really huge thing. And I know a lot of today will hopefully focus on, you know, what does the world of work look like for us? How can employers really support women in the workplace, mothers in the workplace, to not only just get by but also to thrive? Because we know the stats around supporting a diverse workforce. We know the business impact, the positive business impact that comes from supporting that workforce. But actually, when you've got women who are leaving because of, you know, creating a child, and the guilt that comes with it, and the kind of stigma that's the person then coming back in, what is that impact on the workforce? So, you know, even if we don't want to support people, we know that actually there's a business end to it. I always say, if you don't like human beings, you still know your bottom line needs you to invest in people, so it's just a no-brainer. But I'd like to pick up on that and your personal experiences around when you first came back to work and you had just had a child, or, you know, after multiple pregnancies, like whichever stage is appropriate. I'd really love to reflect on that journey for you and how your employer supported. And certainly, John, if you can come in on what employers should be doing, and for that mental health aspect and the families that you mentioned that you're supporting, I'd really love to hear about how that works. So all appropriate stuff. Who would like to pick up that baton?
I'd like to start on this, actually, because you've probably heard me tell this story before, but actually having children was like my defining moment in becoming a gender equality campaigner. And I mean, I've always been a campaigner by trade, so it probably came quite naturally to me. And working in the transport sector, yes, we know it's heavily male dominated, only 20% of the workforce are women. But because I do comms and public affairs roles, and I was working for quite a large comms and public affairs team, so there were more women. So this might sound a bit weird, but I hadn't really noticed the lack of women in transport until I had my children. And I think it was after my second son was born, actually. So I had them quite close together. So I had a toddler and a baby, and I didn't take that long maternity leave. With my first, it was actually probably not long enough. With my second, I think I just took 6 months or so. So I came back in that sleep deprivation phase, and I was in quite a senior role in managing a large team, and I just felt like I was not operating at my best at all, and massively sleep deprived. Felt like I wasn't on top of my game because I didn't have time to read things and do all the kind of detail that I used to do. And that's when I started to think, okay, so who are my role models? Who's going through the same sort of situation as me? And that's when I kind of realized, hold on, there's just not enough women in this industry. There's not enough women to be champions and role models. Yes, there's some amazing women, but just not enough. And that's when I thought I need to reach out and campaign and inspire more young women to join the industry. So that was my kind of light bulb moment. So I think, yeah, for me, it was really the confidence thing and looking around and thinking, well, where's my support networks? And although, I mean, I had a very good employer that was very helpful, if you don't have enough role models, then that is an issue. And I mean, some of the anecdotal evidence I've heard from other women is that it really depends sometimes on your line manager rather than on your employer, because even if your employer has good policies in place, if your line manager is not supportive, they might not follow the policies, or they might not know, or they might not care.
Yeah.
So actually, it's about your personal relationship with your line manager quite often, I think.
So my experience, so my first 27 years ago, so when I was full-time work, early on in my career, I guess, in transport, there were a few women dotted around various senior kind of roles as well. But literally they would, I remember the one lady that I reported to, she had her first child and she was back within weeks, and you kind of think, what benchmark have you kind of set there? So that was quite challenging. So when I went away to have my daughter, the role I came back to had changed. So that was quite destabilizing, really. So I'd had a very varied positions, and the one that I left when I came back, it was radically different. So that threw me into an environment where not only was the lack of confidence, because I'd been out of the workplace for like 9-10 months, and then coming into a completely new role, new people, new teams to manage, new relationships to build, trying to understand what it was that they wanted from me. The positive for me was that my new line manager that I was reporting to, he was a male, but he had empathy, and he obviously was a dad and had children of a similar age, so he understood and was kind of, like I say, empathetic to it. But you were still expected to do the 9 to 5. There was no leaving work early because you've got a child to look after, even though you were then working into the evenings. But when I had my second, in that 10-year kind of gap between the two, it was a completely different experience. So then I was able to kind of start leaving early to pick my older daughter up from school, and it wasn't frowned upon. So things moved quite quickly, really, in that time. And nowadays, it's changed even more so for the better. So people that I work with, who work for me, when they come back as new parents, there's that flexible approach, there's that leniency. As long as they're getting the job done, then it doesn't really matter where they are doing that job or what hours they're working. So and that's acceptable now, whereas when first 30 years ago that was just not acceptable. Your presence meant that you were fully engaged, as opposed to you actually being fully engaged. So there's been some seismic changes for the better. Are we there yet? Is it perfect? No, it isn't. There's lots more improvement that can happen and should happen. And there's few more of us, back to Joe's point about fewer women in transport. Well, there's more now than there used to be, but still not enough. But at least then the ones that are, and you can see them benefiting from the flexible approach, it can only get better. So I have hope that it gets better for other generations, for my daughters when they, enter this stage of their life where they're having their own families.
I'd say for myself, I second everything that's been said, but I think for myself, it was just re-establishing myself in the organization. It's almost like I felt that, I've had 3 rounds of maternity leave, and every single time, there's been new processes, new people, changes, and I've unfortunately had a new manager every time I've come back from maternity leave. So it's having to re-establish myself again in the workplace, and almost feeling like I'm starting from scratch again, even though you're experienced, you're qualified. It's almost like feeling like, am I a new recruit? And often being treated that way as well, being sidelined, being dismissed sometimes. So I think that's been challenging for me, and just trying to almost struggling to make myself almost seen, and also not wanting to feel judged because I'm a mother, not wanting to feel that am I incompetent, questioning my abilities. So, it has had an impact on me. And I think for myself, going back to this mental health question, I've questioned my abilities, thinking, am I good enough? Should I really be in the workplace, or should I just, be at home with my children? Is it worth it? So, I think for me, it has been a struggle, and I think things have changed. I think COVID has had a big impact, because before COVID, I'd had my second child, and wanted to come back on a working from home every Friday sort of basis, and that was almost frowned upon. I had to prove that I was worthy of that, and I felt really disappointed with that, actually, because I just felt that I want to deliver, and you should enable me to do that as my employer. But I think since COVID, the dynamics completely changed. We've got flexible working, we've got compressed hours, we've got job sharing, and people are just more understanding of the fact that you have children. You don't have to hide yourself. So I've really felt a difference from my first maternity leave to now, and also the policies, because maternity leave with my first child was not as good as it is now. So, people are evolving, they're changing, and there is hope, like Dal said, for the future. Things are getting better. And I think COVID has forced people to really reflect on their policies and think about how they can actually help and support mothers if they want us to contribute towards society, which we should be doing and we are doing. So yeah.
Yeah, if I can just quickly add, I mean, I think for me it was well, you know, looking at 2 decades ago, and but I speak to a lot of women who've had babies and kids more recently. For me, I was so scared of telling my workforce that, you know, my line manager, that I was actually pregnant, because I just felt that, well, what does that mean for me in my career? And I wasn't really that senior at that time either, but and I've heard so many women say exactly the same in more recent times as well. I think we've come a long way, but I think that, and we are at least talking about it, but there is still so much more to do there to make people feel more comfortable. You know, it was like, well, will this be the end of my career? You know, will I still be able to, you know, be on that trajectory to grow and develop and achieve things? You know, and you do kind of question yourself. So emotionally and mentally, it's just, whilst I think most workplaces have various policies in place, you know, Joe, as you said, it's very much dependent on your own line manager. Do you feel comfortable enough to talk about those issues? I mean, I remember I was so tired, and I would go and sleep in my car in the car park in the middle of the day. And I didn't have any maternity leave at that time. So, you know, it was like, how many months can I take unpaid leave? So I had to go back to work within 3 to 4 months, but my heart was really not in it. So was I well, you know, and things had changed. You know, we'd moved locations and offices, and so yeah, I'm hoping that it's a lot better. I do see the policies there, but I think we have a long way to make sure that women are comfortable and don't feel like they're doing something wrong by being pregnant, because anatomically they're the only ones who can actually have babies.
Thank you. I think I'm last. I wanted to be last. Am I last? I am last. Okay, good. I wanted to be last because obviously I don't have a maternity leave story, and I wanted to just sort of take some time and listen to, you know, the real life stuff. That was quite eye-opening, and not I don't necessarily feel emotional, but certainly some of the difficulties and the way that people feel, it really aligns quite well to the whole, you know, well, poor well-being and mental health model. It's kind of a perfect storm of everything that will turn your mental health bad, effectively. And sorry to put that out there, I know that's probably not great. It's not necessarily unavoidable, but I think somebody said earlier, you don't get taught any of this stuff, right? It's just kind of, you know, grow a human and crack on, which is remarkable. But if we look at just what well-being and mental health is, and everyone sort of commented about confidence depleting, general energy, I'm not sure how I would fit into the day looking after another human. I'm very fortunate in my position where I can be extremely selfish, but well-being is an overarching feeling of how comfortable, happy and healthy we are. It's not something that you just wake up one day and have. It's something that you grow over time. It's like when the majority of children are born crying, I think, as well. So it's kind of like our first entry into the world is in tears. Thanks for that, everybody. But so well-being is this overarching feeling, and then mental health is a state of our well-being. So I think sometimes we see them as separate things, but they kind of have a domino effect onto each other. And our well-being is made up of 4 areas of behavior. So maybe you guys can tell me which areas of behavior are impacted by giving birth, pregnancy, the whole shebang. So we've got move, so that's exercise. We all getting loads of exercise in and stuff? No, not certainly, probably not for pregnancy or for maternity leave, you know, raising kids. It changes it for the lot. Focus is a second activity, so that's like things like reading, time to be in the present moment, so that's where meditation and things like that come in. I can't imagine you can pop your headphones in, close your eyes and
No, but
listen
you're
to an
very
app.
much in the present moment when you've got a child screaming at you. There's no choice
You just
but
don't
to be in
want
the
to be.
present moment.
Yeah. And then we've got discover, so that's learning new things, and that's more like finding solutions and achievements. You know, when you have an achievement, you're really boosted. So that's kind of confidence and all of that sort of stuff. So something that is almost the opposite of that. Not to say that when people aren't, people are raising kids, you don't have an achievement or anything like that, because obviously you do, but it's more you can't enjoy the moment of achieving something, if you know what I mean. So you can't really sit in that, I've really done something really well there, you know what I mean, and like reflecting on it and recognizing your accomplishment. So because you are so, you know, raise this kid, it's you don't have the time to be able to actually reflect on the incredible stuff that you do, and therefore you're not giving your confidence or self-esteem a chance. Well, the situation isn't giving your confidence or self-esteem a chance. I'm sure you probably would give it a chance if you had opportunity. Then it's communication. So that's the relationships that they have with friends, family. That's all going to change during that period as well. I've got an 18-month-old niece, and I know that from my sister's perspective, you know, relationships with friends at school and lots of different stuff changes. And then finally, it's empathy and helping others. And helping others has a massive, it releases dopamine, it releases oxytocin, the love hormone, which at that moment everyone will be flooded with, which is great. But it also combats stress. It prevents the release of cortisol when you're helping somebody else. And the only thing is with help is that if you are almost locked into it or feel obliged, a bit like, you know, parents homeschooling through COVID. It's like, you're doing a great thing, you're really helping out your kids, but it's involuntary and it's not on your terms. So then that can foster some level of resentment. So or lots of other things as well. But it doesn't develop a healthy relationship with empathy and helping others. It's kind of like, it develops more of a self-sacrificial mindset sometimes. So those 5 areas of behavior, as soon as we go through a life event, so whether it's a seasonal change, house move, for today's purposes, we'll say childbirth, which is, we have like really good experiences along the top of like a wave, if you imagine a wave, and then really bad experiences that we can all go through, like bereavement or something. So where would you guys, one question I wanted to ask is, where would you all put childbirth? On the top or the bottom of that wave?
I think everyone has very different experiences. I did hypnobirthing, so that definitely helped. But did you say the top of the wave is like the amazing?
Yeah, like weddings and all of that sort of stuff. So
it's not on the top of the wave, put it that way.
And
which
actually, is interesting because it's such a remarkable thing. And like,
yeah, with my first son, it took me a real long time to even like get that maternal instinct. Whereas with my second son, right away, I felt like this amazing rush of love. So maybe in some ways it is near the top of the wave, but it's not like a wedding, because you've given birth to a baby. And for many people, that is a very grueling experience.
Mm-hmm. I think someone mentioned trauma. I think, Shireen, it might have been you, and I think I agree with you, Joe. It was, for me, it was the bottom of it's the bottom of the curve. It was quite a traumatic experience, and then the feelings and the emotions, and just trying to reestablish who am I as an individual. It took a lot of soul searching, and it's only when I went back to work and, you know, all of that, I felt like I was myself again, and you know, it took me a little bit of time to get back on that journey. But yeah, it was yeah, unfortunately, yeah, the love didn't come immediately. It's not a natural instinct, I don't think. Maybe the empathy does, but yeah, interesting one.
I think it's a lot of shock. So for me, and I joked, whenever we speak, I say, because I'm a project manager and I like to plan as much as I can and all this stuff. And I had an elective cesarean, and there were reasons behind it. My son was quite big in my belly, and I was worried for other reasons. And myself and the doctor agreed that a cesarean was the best option for this. And so I did that. So in my head, I was like, great, I know he's going to be born on Tuesday. I know it'll be roughly 11 o'clock, like brilliant. But obviously, like I jest, but nothing prepares you for actually what you go through. And there's nothing that can prepare you. And I think that's why people don't talk about it, actually, because I think when you get into this kind of conversation, it can probably put people off, if I'm really honest, because when you go into the nitty gritty of it, it's not fun. And so I had a cesarean. I was actually in the hospital for a week after giving birth because I got 2 infections. So I like to bundle them all in. My son was fine. We could have gone home, but myself, my husband and me and my little one were all in this ward for 5-6 days. And there are stats around the kind of inequalities amongst white mothers versus those that are not white, so black, Asian, etc. And there are real stats there. So I, within 24 hours, not even 24 actually, about 12 or 16 hours, was about to be released back into the world population, got told you're getting out. They'd missed, they thought I was someone else. So I was just stood there having just come out of surgery, literally everything's everywhere, trying to work out what to do with this child, then being told I need to leave the hospital. And I was like, nope, that's not me, that's someone else. And they then believed me after my husband came back to the ward and said, nope, she's just given birth. And so there's all these things you're just battling against it. And so yeah, I was there for a week. They handed me this child as soon as he obviously came out, which was brilliant. I'm never going to forget that moment. But I also had no idea what the hell I was doing. They wheeled me back to the ward, expecting me to breastfeed. And I thought, what the hell do you do with this thing? Everyone's looking at you, expecting you to be all smiles. I've just been cut open. I cannot feel my legs. Genuinely, right the way from your belly to your internal organs, you've just had a baby come out. And then within a few hours, everyone's smiling and gushing and all that dopamine that you mentioned. I feel like that's with everyone else. You're there saying, give me the drugs. And so, yeah, there's a lot in there. And I think trauma is how I would describe it, because there are trauma that can lead to really beautiful things as well, and that's okay. And I always think the human experience, the human journey, it is messy, and the more we speak about the mess, the more empathy we can give to each other. Because when we say how kind of elitist it is because I've had this experience versus that experience, you're taking away any layers of humanity. And I think, Dal, you mentioned about having empathy. I think it's great to understand what other parents go through. What I don't think is right is that we have to experience it to understand what other people go through, because we cannot experience every intersection of society. That would be impossible. But we should be able to be empathetic enough, human enough to have conversations like this, perhaps. Maybe, the detail is great actually in some respects as it opens it up to other people. But we should be like comfortable in our discomfort sometimes.
It wasn't a wave, John. It was more of a roller coaster. It was, society expects you just to cope, doesn't it? I mean, there's an expectation, and then if you're not coping, you're not a good mom. So there's other pressure that you put on yourself, because you have those ideas as well before your first child. You think, well, you see parents on an outward trajectory, they cope well, women cope well, built to cope well, and you see from your mom and how your mom copes with more than one child, running your house, and that it just all happens and they appear happy. You're then presented with your first, and the second one is a different experience. But for the first time that you're put in this situation where your body has been through the trauma that, as Shireen describes, to various different levels, and you're just expected to cope, and you're expected to know what to do. Society expects you to know. Family around you expect you to have the answers. Like, why is the child screaming? Must be hungry. They start to solutionize because the child's crying. Have you changed the nappy? Have you, and they're like picking on answers for you, which puts more pressure on you to know what the problem is. You're not going to know until you've experienced it for a while, and you adjust your behaviors and you understand the different cries, the intensity of it, and you start to connect. And until all of that happens, you're just living day to day, hour by hour, because every day is going to be different. Every hour you're experiencing is different. That's what you find for the first 3 or 4 months. Certainly that was my experience. For the first 3 or 4 months, you just don't know what's normal. What I'm experiencing, is that what all moms go through? It doesn't look like it, doesn't feel like it. People are telling me it isn't. So, you know, and then you're put on the negative. So your mindset becomes very negative in that, am I doing something wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why is this child crying? You know, breastfeeding is traumatic. No one tells you that. You know, you're already in pain after giving birth, and then your chest's on fire because you're struggling to breastfeed. But the midwife will come in and tell you everything that you're doing wrong. You know, and so that's the experience of it. There's very little positivity going on, and certainly that was my experience of it.
Something my sister mentioned. Sorry, I'm using my sister as a bit of a guinea pig. We haven't checked with her, so she'll be fine. But she also said that when people would sort of come to see her, like friends or family or whatever, they're not coming to see her. They're coming to see the baby or the kid. So it's almost like any relationships or communication that you do have with people, you're not having with them because they're only interested in seeing the kid. And it's just, I think there was this moment where she just got quite frustrated and sort of said, like, no one's asking me or coming to see me. And people won't come round if she's asleep because they're not bothered about just seeing me. And that's cool. That's a very sort of a, I don't know, not necessarily degrading, but that's I can imagine why, like Shireen, you mentioned conditions earlier. Like, I can see why that could be quite depressive for everybody, really.
It'd be interesting from the group to find out, because I certainly know that when I got married and when I had my little one, the relationships kind of outside of your family, relationships change. So a lot of people I used to speak to, just for whatever reason, they're not in my circle anymore. But when that happens and you're not sure why, because I think everyone has their own fertility story, whether it's good or bad, and sometimes people are not necessarily happy for you because your life's changed, and it might be conscious or subconscious. But it'd be really interesting to know, kind of from that friend aspect, or from what you've just said, John, around the kind of wider circle, but also the support that your family has provided, and how that benefits, because some people have it, some people don't. And I know here we've got different stories, so I'd really like to talk about that. And then just from that, I'd like to go into what the role of the workplace, because that is like networks, and it's another family. We spend 80% of our time at work, so that is a part of that. So what was your own kind of family network, friendship network, and then work network? They're the kind of angles from what John has just said that I'd like to go into, if that's all right. Who wants to pick? I think, Philo, I'm going to ask you to pick that up first.
I think, as I said, it was a difficult ride for me. And then when my daughter was 2, my relationship broke down. So I separated, and then I had to bring up my daughter on my own. So I think I really struggled with finding my individuality. I think I lost it somewhere along the way. And as a result, the relationship broke down. And I think that was a really, so from one trauma to the next, I think is a separation and all of that. And then, is trying, fending for yourself out there. So it was an interesting dynamics on how one led to the other in a way. And then I had to, find myself all over again. And on top of all of that, coming from a Catholic background, there was the sort of the shame, or I thought I was ashamed because I felt like I'd let the community down, I'd let the family down, and should I be back in the relationship? So whilst also maintaining a career and and raising a child and moving homes and all of that, so for me, life was really, it was up in the air, and no regrets now, but reflecting back to the past, it was a very painful transition, and just to sort of re-find myself on that journey of, it's about being a woman. And there was so much guilt, carrying guilt, that, and I speak about the mother's guilt. I'm always conscious of, am I doing enough? Am I giving enough of my time to my child? And even now, even though she's an adult, I still have that guilt. Did I do the right thing at that time? Because, the decisions I've made way back when have influenced the rest of her life, the rest of my life, and the various decisions I've taken along. So, it's been a roller coaster. It's not all been fun, but we've had some great times along the way as well.
I can say a bit about like family and support networks, because I live in London. My parents at the time that I had my children, they were in Scotland, and so was my sister. So sort of direct family quite far away, but luckily enough, my cousin lives near me, and she had her first baby at the same time. So we both had our firstborn like literally a week apart. So that was actually really helpful. And my husband's sister is near us as well. So having a bit of family support near us, that was really beneficial. And in terms of workplace support, well, yeah, I guess I went back quite quickly, which was perhaps a mistake, because you look back and you think, well, what, it was the right decision for me at the time, but maybe that doesn't send the right message to the generations that are coming up behind you. So I found, yeah, workplace support was quite helpful. But I mean, we're probably going to come on in a bit to more like the future of what we like from employers. So I won't cover that now. But yeah, family and friends around you is definitely important.
Thank you. And Susan and Dal?
Yeah, I agree with Jo. Family support is really important when you're, you know, starting your motherhood journey. And I think for me, coming from a Nigerian background, it's all about supporting a new mother. So my mum came to stay with me, you know, in the early days, and my mother-in-law also came after that. So that really helped me to get some rest and, you know, get adjusted in my mind to the fact that I was a mum now. I was responsible for another human being, and, you know, just looking around at the women in my family and using them as examples, and always being able to speak to them if I was going through any challenges. And I was also quite lucky because me and my sister had kids. We had 2 kids at the same time. So we were always on maternity leave together. We could call each other, you know, when we wanted to have a catch up, when we wanted to have a little moan. Because that's the other thing. Not everybody's on maternity leave. So your friends are still working. And you're just, sometimes you do get bored, because you just think, okay, everyone's at work. What am I going to do with myself? Yes, there's baby groups, but yeah, it was really nice having my sister there to talk to. I mean, she's my younger sister, but we're really close. So yeah, having that network's really important. And also for me, I'm a Christian, so my faith really grounded me when I was having challenges, you know, just spending time in prayer. That was really important to me. And also during my delivery, I had really good births for all my kids. And I think what helped me was my faith and having a positive mindset towards it. And I think it goes a long way. And although there is trauma, yes, it's a challenging situation to be in, you know, giving birth, and it can be dangerous as well, to be honest with you. But I think having a positive mindset is really important. And I do try to encourage other women, and not to be too negative, because it does put people off, like you said, Shireen, it puts people off. And but just having that positive mindset goes a long way. One thing I would say about my friendships, yeah, it did change for me as well, because you're doing something completely different. You know, I was married, I had young children, and some of my friends weren't even in a relationship, so we couldn't relate in the same way. And you do find yourself gravitating to mothers, because you're on the same journey, and you know, you can connect on those points. So yeah, I mean, things did change, but you get used to your new norm, to be honest with you. Yeah, and you appreciate that network of mothers, because you're on that journey together.
Now, my experience similar to Susan's. It's so when I had my mother-in-law was quite key to it all. They lived close by, and they kind of were ever present in the early kind of months, and that was great support. Sometimes I'd feel a bit overwhelmed by their ever presence. It was kind of, I need to get used to being on my own with the baby, leave me alone. But they'd always be there, like, you know, so
too much love.
Side. Yeah, too much love, but from a good place, and you know, you always accept it, but there were times where that itself was overwhelming and challenging. And from friends' perspective, like you say, that they had their own lives, different interests. When a baby comes along, all conversations seem to be about babies. For however you start the conversation and wherever you want to take, it always ends up talking about the baby. So yeah, that then kind of petered off for a bit, for a year or so, until baby wasn't always the topic of conversation, and then it starts to regroup again. But yeah, family was key. Honestly, it was, despite the overwhelmingness of it.
A lot of advice given, right? That you're not sure if you want to take.
Absolutely, yeah. oh yeah, all this like kind of, their experiences, I guess.
One of the things I realised was that people used to recommend gripe water and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
when I looked it up, it's actually because gripe water back in the day used to have a bit of alcohol in it. And I think that's why it worked so well. And I was like, I don't know if that's okay today. So it's really interesting. So what worked then, like, some of it is great, but obviously some of it didn't quite work. We've had our own experiences. A lot of us, we're in senior positions. We now have the opportunity to support other women coming into, into any sector, but any workplace, but, after motherhood. And some of the, I've been writing down kind of keywords as everyone's been speaking. So we have spoken about the line manager relationship, but I'd also like to pick on what does the policy look like? So the relationships, we know they're very subjective, right? And it depends on who that line manager is, but actually what policies and procedures and how can we ensure that people are meeting those policies and procedures? So what is that accountability? I'd really like to touch on that. A couple of you, I think, Joe, you mentioned, and some of the others mentioned around, I think Dal certainly as well, about representation and role models. And so I see us all in positions where we can influence, and certainly having these conversations enables that as well. And I know we didn't have these conversations even a few years ago. Dal, you mentioned around coming back to work and it being destabilizing, and I know Susan, you mentioned that as well about kind of coming back and being a bit unsure of yourself. So what's the role of re-onboarding? What does that look like for mothers in the workplace? And what does perhaps flexible working, and certainly the way I pitch things around COVID is that all the negativities of it, we've got a real once in a lifetime opportunity, once in a career, once in a lifetime, once in a generation. I think probably once in a century, actually, because of the forces that are trying to change what is the new status quo. But what lessons can we take from that to enable mothers not to just get by, not to just get through stuff, but to actually to thrive and therefore give back to their organizations? So I'd like to touch upon that, have some real tangibles that we can take away.
So at National Express here, we have what are called Keep in Touch days. So whilst people are on their maternity leave, they can come in and, come into work as if it was a normal kind of work day and just reacquaint themselves with their environment, with people, with the work. And you have a few of those in the run up to someone coming back to work full time. So I think that really helps, because you're not that sudden shock of nothing and then everything all at once, that you're eased into it. So I think that really helps, and more of that I think is something that we should consider.
I think most workplaces have opportunities to like helplines and things like that. So if people are having trouble either themselves or their family members and extended members, I think it's really important to make sure that you whether it's yourself or someone within your team, to just remind them that these facilities are there and they're anonymous, etc., and reach out and use it so that you can speak to someone who can be rational. And I think just wanted to also touch on employee groups. So within my current workplace, we have employee groups focusing on a number of DEI areas, particularly with the Women's Network. They do have a pregnancy buddy program, like where women come back to the workplace, so they can buddy up with somebody just to support them through their journey of returning back to work after having had a child, because it can be quite daunting, and you're leaving your child behind, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that, and I think there's a number of people I've mentioned that too, and it's really helped them.
I think so. Something I've been thinking about, and I've mentioned the confidence point quite a lot during this discussion, but I also know that lots of new mothers, sort of once they're first back at work, or even sometimes when women are on maternity leave, they think about either applying for another job or applying for a promotion, and you're definitely not on the same you're not at the top of your game because of either confidence issues or lack of sleep or whatever. So it's actually much, much harder to be on an even footing with someone who's not in the same situation as you. And I've been thinking a lot about an equity approach to new mothers and, sort of mothers that are trying to go for promotion or trying to advance their careers. And because it is a protected characteristic, and it's the same for all protected characteristic groups, perhaps we should be looking at equity. Shall I explain equity in case some of the listeners don't know an equity approach?
Yeah,
so my 9-year-old son, actually, he gives a really good explanation of the difference between equity and equality. So if you had 3 people, a very tall person, a medium height person, and a small person, and an apple tree, and you'd ask them all to pick some apples off the tree, and if you gave them all exactly the same height of ladder, that would be equality. But of course, the taller people would still have an advantage in getting the apples. So if you want to take an equity approach, then you would give the smallest person the tallest ladder, and the medium person a medium ladder, and perhaps the tall person doesn't need a ladder or only a very short ladder. So that's equity. So I think in terms of helping new mothers and pregnant women to progress in the workplace and progress into new roles, employers should be taking an equity approach.
I really like that. And I have to say, when I started working with you, Jo, if I reflect on that kind of ladder example, that's exactly, I think, the relationship that we had, because I was just coming off of maternity leave. And Jo and I, just for context, had been speaking for a while, but the opportunity to work together hadn't quite come up, and we'd been speaking for a long time. And I was from an agency that I was working at, went on maternity leave. They didn't offer any maternity support. I was going to take 3 months. It became a year, because actually that was what I wanted to do. So I did that. And within 8 weeks of being returned, I was made redundant, which is really helpful when you're a new mum and not sure what the hell's going on. So that left me feeling in lots of turmoil. And when we speak about, what can employers do, it's a very good example of what employers shouldn't do. Because even coming back, they said to me, we need to speak to the board about you returning. When I was a permanent member of staff, there was no need for the board to approve my returns. That made me feel a lack of confidence and insecurity about what I was coming back to. I had to then ask to work part-time because they wouldn't allow me to do remote working. When COVID hit, I was the first employee that they said you can work remotely. So I do remember thinking within a few weeks, the world had kind of changed it for me. But then being made redundant, again, you've got to slam after slam. But when Jo and I started working together, I was very much new mum. I think COVID had just hit. So you got, uncertainties around that. Had an 8-month or 9-month-old, however old he was then, in the background. You've got all this real life stuff, but then you're also trying to deliver really tough work we were doing at the time. And I think doing all of that, for me, when you describe that equitable approach, I feel like you gave me the longest ladder to be able to do the best I could do in that situation. But I try not to cry with these conversations, they're very real life, but I feel like that's what I was given, so I'm therefore able to then be my best self in the workplace, which is what anyone wants, right? Yeah, so what do those ladders look like for the rest of us?
I'd like to add to that, actually, just creating that kind of inclusive environment. I think that's really important, and addressing those biases in the workplace, those unconscious biases, and that's by providing training to managers, to employees. I think we need to reflect on those behaviors in hiring, in promoting of people, in performance evaluations. I think that's really important. And we talk about race, religion, gender, all these other factors, but also the motherhood journey as well, because we are affected. And I think, just speaking as a Black woman, there are challenges that I faced in my career journey, sometimes being discriminated against and having to sort of prove myself. And I think we need to be conscious in the workplace of addressing that and not just letting it slip under the carpet, dealing with microaggressions as well. So yeah, that, I think training is really important, and that education piece is imperative.
And policy around, from my perspective, it's much more around policy to do with mental health and well-being. And from what most people have said throughout this discussion, it was mentioned about the 5 areas of behaviour previously, and basically they just get wiped out with pregnancy and childbirth. The issue with that is you might sort of think, yeah, I haven't been able to exercise for a while, or how often do we kind of say, oh, I should read more, or whatever it might be. The impact of not doing those behaviours, I think when it comes to people's mental health, we often look at what mentally ill people do way too much rather than what they're missing out on or what they've missed. Recovery is about, it's not about kind of establishing something new or getting better. It's finding something that has previously been lost. So if you were to recover something, that's what it means. You're finding something that you already have had, but you're just finding it again. And each of those 5 areas of behavior connect neurologically with our ability to regulate our emotions, to motivate ourselves, to communicate, build relationships, and you know, as we said, that's kind of wiped out with pregnancy and childbirth, and even raising of children. So the policy should be around not necessarily just making people better, but how to facilitate those behaviors effectively in the workplace. So if you are, you know, seasonally, if you're going into winter and you know that people are going to be arriving when it's dark, leaving when it's dark, it might be that we can adjust the work day so people have a long lunch and then can actually fit the gym in or something like that. And it's more about the facilitation of those positive behaviors and recognizing that people need some support to achieve them, so that they don't get on well in the first place, or that these more negative aspects don't start creeping in. Because unfortunately, you know, there's not the technology yet that someone else can exercise for me and then I'm going to get the benefit, because I would definitely tap into like Brad Pitt or something. So we have to do these things ourselves, but we need to be allowed time for that. And for it to be realistic. It's like kind of like the equivalent of a company having a cycle scheme, but everyone lives a train ride away. It's kind of like, yeah, well done for getting something in, but it's not practical for us. So to prevent the diminishing of those, you know, our communication skills, our regulation ability, part and parcel of the plan, the check-ins with people, even during keeping touch days, you know, things like that should be fostered around how are you doing within these 5 areas of your life, and how can we as an organization, or, you know, if you're talking about support networks, how can your family, how can your friends support you to achieve those? So when they're coming around to see the baby or helping you out, you're able to go off and do something for you. I know that probably right now doesn't sound that realistic. But if we can structure well-being and prioritize it in that way, I think it will mitigate an awful lot of the issues that people do face when they go back to work that doesn't fit within the systemic issues. Just as because I know you guys mentioned about quite a lot of the systemic issues, so I wanted to see if there might be something else that I might be able to bring.
No, 100%. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone so much for your time today. As ever, there's lots more to be discussed here, and we've got loads more podcasts coming up. The next ones in June will be around Pride, and also we touch upon infertility in a separate podcast as well, because as I said before, everyone's journey is different into every aspect of life. So, and this is just one part of it. So thank you to all of our speakers today for giving that different impact, and John, absolutely yourself. It's really interesting to have that real mental health lens, which is exactly why we wanted to bring you on today as well.
You've been listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Join us next time as we hear more from the women in our sector. Please visit the website for more details on how to become a member of Women in Transport, and remember to like, follow and share this podcast.